Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. As always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. The Tigers signed left-hander Brian Salmons, who pitched for them during the 2024 season, to a minor league contract with a non-roster invitation to MLB spring training. And Brian Salmons, who spent the 2025 season in Japan, will earn $1.25 million if he makes the MLB roster. So Big Tuna is back, but we're going to have to wait until next week to talk about him because we have a lot of other things to talk about this week. Chris, we have really come a long way from the Tigers and Casey Mize being 25,000 apart in their salary arbitration filings, haven't we?
Yeah, well, this is a record-setting one, right? Like this is going to set some sort of precedent one way or another. And it is, it is interesting to see the people up in arms about the Tigers being cheap. And I'm sure there were people plenty saying that too with Casey Mize, but it feels much louder now when it's a $13 million gap that they're offering him $19 million. With Casey Mize, it was, quibbling over, how much money it takes to buy a weekend's worth of mustard at Comerica Park. But here we are.
Let's get into the good stuff. The Tigers and Tarik Skubal could not agree on a salary for the 2026 season before Thursday's arbitration deadline, setting up an arbitration hearing in February after the two sides filed $13 million apart. So what was your reaction when you saw the Tigers filed at $19 million and Tarik Skubal filed at $32 million? Here's what you need to know. The arbitration deadline, it actually has two deadlines, a soft deadline at 1 p.m. and a hard deadline at 8 p.m. The 8 p.m. deadline is the important deadline because that's when players and teams who don't agree in negotiations need to exchange salary figures in preparation for an arbitration hearing. In this case, the Tigers filed at $19 million and Skubal, who is represented by agent Scott Boras, filed at $32 million. As for what's next, arbitration hearing, it's coming in February. There will be a panel of 3 arbitrators, and they will decide whether Skubal is worth more or less than the midpoint, which is $25.5 million. That is the midpoint of $19 million and $32 million. If Skubal is worth $1 more than $25.5 million, then he receives his $32 million proposed salary. If Skubal is worth $1 less than $25.5 million, then he receives the Tigers' $19 million proposed salary. Essentially, the arbitrators will decide either $19 million or $32 million without any in-between salary. So in 2026, Tarik Skubal will make either $19 million or $32 million, and then he will become a free agent after the 2026 season. When you saw the filings, what'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the number that jumped out to me at the beginning was the $32 million asked from Skubal and Boras. Maybe I should have seen it coming, knowing how Boras likes to set precedent and how Juan Soto got $31 million in his final year of arbitration. But, I'm fairly familiar with how arbitration traditionally works. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not a lawyer or anything like that. But I know that's almost always based on precedent. What other players like you have been awarded in arbitration or with or without a hearing. And even beyond that, like what you yourself have done as a player the year before and the years before that. And I knew that no pitcher had ever been given $30 million, nowhere close to $32 million, not even $20 million, which was, David Price was 19.75 from the Tigers. And so that number jumped out at me. And I also, kind of keep track of this sort of stuff on MLB trade rumors. They generally do a pretty good job of estimating. They're never like spot on, but they're pretty close. And they had Skubal for $17.8 million. So I was like, okay, somewhere in 17 to 22 makes sense. So the 32 number jumped out at me. And then, the more you think about it, the more like, oh, boy, the Tigers, that is a little bit low. So, but yeah, my initial reaction was like, wow, they're going for it.
So I wasn't surprised that Skubal filed at $32 million when all was said and done, but I was surprised that the Tigers filed at $19 million. And the reason for that is before the 8 p.m. deadline, players and teams, they can negotiate in hopes of avoiding arbitration. During that time, the Tigers offered Skubal $19.8 million for 2026. To be clear, the Tigers filed at $19 million, but before the 8 p.m. deadline to file, the Tigers were willing to do $19.8 million. I haven't reported that in Freep.com yet. I'm still working on this story, but that's what I've heard. The Tigers offered $19.8 million before the deadline, then filed at $19 million at the deadline. That means Tarik Skubal is risking $800K because he turned down $19.8 million only for the Tigers to file at $19 million. But there's the upside of gaining $13 million if his $32 million proposed salary wins at the arbitration hearing. So for Tarik Skubal, it is an $800K risk for a 13 million gain? Like, that's kind of the way that I look at it. And if you would have asked me going into Thursday's arbitration deadline, if you would have called me up on Wednesday night and said, hey, if these two sides need to exchange figures, where is Tarik Skubal going to file? At that time, Wednesday night, I would not have said 32 million. But then I read what ESPN's Jeff Passan uncovered. Here's what Jeff Passan wrote in ESPN.com on the morning of Thursday's arbitration deadline day. Quote, working in Skubal's favor are his so-called special accomplishments, which any player who has set records or won awards can cite. Back-to-back Cy Youngs, including one in his most recent season with recency rewarded, alongside the sort of numbers he has posted, gives Skubal a case where it's impossible to argue the negatives because there aren't any. On top of that is a rarely used provision that allows players with more than 5 years of service time to compare themselves not only to past arbitration eligible players, but to everyone in baseball. Meaning that if Skubal were to choose, say, peak Max Scherzer, 43.3 million, or Zach Wheeler, 42 million, as his comparables, he could make the case in front of an arbitration panel that because of his special achievements and consistent performance, he is worthy of a salary similar to theirs, end quote. After reading that, I checked with some different agents around the game, and some of them speculated that Skubal could file at 35 million, maybe even more than 35 million. So once I started to hear that, I was not surprised that Skubal filed at 32 million, because if anyone is ever going to move the arbitration market, set a new precedent based on special accomplishments as a back-to-back American League Cy Young winner, is Tarik Skubal. Like, this has never been done in salary arbitration, where a player of this caliber could negotiate his value at 5 years of MLB service time. Like, Skubal, of course, has like 5 years, 114 days of service time. Players need to reach 6 years to get to free agency. And if Skubal wins, he's going to set the record for the largest arbitration contract in MLB history at 32 million, surpassing the 31 million secured by Juan Soto from the New York Yankees in 2024. And we all know agent Scott Boras loves to set records. And if Skubal wins, it would set a new precedent for salary arbitration because of the special accomplishments and rarely used provision that Jeff Passan outlined in ESPN.com. And as a result, this could possibly force change to the entire arbitration system. So I just think when you consider all those factors, I'm not surprised that Skubal filed at 32 million. I'm a little bit surprised that the Tigers filed at only 19 million. I would have expected them to file maybe at 21 or 22 million. And then that increases the midpoint and maybe gives the Tigers a better chance of winning. Whereas in this case, I think it really comes down to, is Tarik Skubal worth more or less than 25.5 million? And when you consider the special achievements, when you consider this rarely used provision, I wouldn't be surprised if a panel of 3 arbitrators sit down and say he's worth more than 25.5 million.
Yeah, I read that Passan article. It was, that morning before all this came out. And I'm like, all right. And I've learned this from you, talking to you too. Like, if you guys have an opinion, sometimes it's very well informed or you're doing a research piece. And so I knew, like, okay, Passan knows this is going to happen. He wouldn't write this article unless he knew this was going to happen. And yeah, I mean, this is precedent setting. You touched on it. You encapsulated it all. Goes beyond Skubal and Boras, and it could have an effect over the entirety of baseball in the future, the way arbitration is handled. And it's going to be a big thing heading into next, the labor negotiations, which, come December 1st is when they begin or whatever, or technically when the current CBA is over. So there's a lot more going on here than just the Tigers and Skubal. And I think Ken Rosenthal wrote an article too. And what he wrote was that it's not necessarily all 100% the Tigers. Like obviously they make the decision, and same with Skubal and Boras. Like, there are other factors involved here. Like, I forget what he called it, but there's kind of like a Major League Baseball, like, suggested retail price thing that they put out there. Like, this is what we would do. And, as a team, you don't necessarily want to go out there and upset all the other owners. You're trying to present a united front. So there's just so much more to it. But yeah, ultimately, this is a huge, huge gulf between these two parties. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
A non-Tigers related topic that is always going to be a Tigers related topic. Alex Bregman signed with the Chicago Cubs on Saturday, agreeing to a 5-year, $175 million contract. Are you disappointed the Tigers didn't even make an offer?
It's disappointing, certainly. I think, we had a couple weeks ago, we had Dan Szymborski from Fangraphs on, and he kind of mentioned that he didn't necessarily think Bregman was worth the cost because he thought, his Zips predictions had the Tigers getting fairly, not equivalent production as Bregman, but close enough to not make it worth it. But I think it goes beyond that, beyond the kind of spreadsheet stuff. And it's all the stuff we've talked about Bregman for like the last year and a half, right? Like it's the leadership qualities. It's the kind of player he is, the contact and the lack of whiffs, the sort of stuff that the Tigers needed down the stretch last year. And beyond that, I think the most important thing is what it would say to the fans. It's if they signed him, I think the fans might finally be happy. And I'm sure they wouldn't be happy if they had tried and didn't get him, but another attempt at it would have been something, I guess. And just to hear that they didn't even try is disheartening for sure.
The new news, which I just reported in Freep.com, is that the Tigers were not involved in Alex Bregman negotiations before he signed with the Cubs. I'll get to my thoughts on that. But first off, I do want to tip my cap to Alex Bregman and even agent Scott Boras here. Like, this is actually a 6-year, $215 million deal. If you think about it that way, $40 million from the Boston Red Sox in 2025 and $175 million from the Chicago Cubs from 2026 to 2030. Say what you want about Scott Boras, but no one is better than him at parlaying these short-term contracts into long-term wins, and he did it with Alex Bregman. Now, the $215 million, when you account for deferred money in the Red Sox and Cubs contract, it actually carries a present-day value in the high $180 million or the low $190 million range. So think about it as 6 years, 180 to 190 million. But if you remember what the Tigers offered Alex Bregman last offseason, it was 6 years, 171.5 million with an opt-out after 2026 and some deferred money. So Alex Bregman, by turning down the Tigers, signing with the Red Sox, opting out of the Red Sox contract, and signing with the Cubs, he actually earned more than he would have had he just accepted the Tigers offer. And on top of that, the Cubs gave him a full no-trade clause, which is a massive advantage for the player. That is very pro-player to get a full no-trade clause. So for Alex Bregman, he lives in Arizona in the offseason. Now he trains in Arizona for spring training with the Cubs, and that's going to happen for the next 5 years of his life. And he knows he's going to spend the summers in Chicago. So when you know all of that is going to be consistent for 5 years, it's a huge bonus for a player with 2 young kids. As for the Tigers, they maintained this lukewarm interest throughout the offseason. Maybe they were going to jump in the mix if the market crashed on Alex Bregman, but clearly the market never crashed. The 4 teams that were in the mix this offseason, the Cubs, Red Sox, Toronto Blue Jays, and Arizona Diamondbacks. The Cubs and the Red Sox emerged as the finalists. Last offseason, the Red Sox, Tigers, and Cubs were the finalists. But this offseason, the Tigers weren't in the hunt. And Bregman's market never crashed, so the Tigers never even had the opportunity to think twice about getting into the mix. So am I disappointed the Tigers didn't make an offer this offseason? I'll convey my answer to that question with another question. Do I think Alex Bregman would have increased the Tigers' chances of winning the World Series in 2026? The answer to that is yes. Just like the answer to that was yes last season. And that is something everyone can agree on, even President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris. I don't know, whatever happened to the saying, if you don't succeed, try again. I think it would have been nice to see the Tigers at least try again in the Alex Bregman sweepstakes, but that's not what happened. All right, let's get into the big 2. Question 1 of the big 2. Who do you think will win the arbitration hearing that is going to have the attention of the entire baseball industry? Detroit Tigers at 19 million or Tarik Skubal at 32 million?
Oh man, I've kind of gone back and forth on this. When I mentioned, the first thing that stuck out to me was that Skubal number. And so I thought, well, there's no way that they're going to win. But, as more time goes on, I go, well, I don't know, and I would never ever bet against Scott Boras in something like this. He doesn't have a, 100% success track record and things like this, but he's going to be prepared. I'll know that. So yeah, I think it's going to come down to the kind of arbitrators they get, which is, and it's always just a bit of a crapshoot. Like these people may not be baseball fans. They might not be big baseball fans. They might not know about baseball at all. It's a little bit like you could go, I don't know, let's say your dog bites your neighbor or something like that. You have to go to court and you end up with a judge who loves dogs. You might have a better chance. Or you could end up with a judge whose parents were eaten by a Labradoodle and you're in trouble. So if these people, it depends on how much they know about baseball and which arguments they buy into. I think, and as you said, you laid it out that the Tigers can compare Skubal to the best of the best now. They can compare him to guys who are not pre-arb. And if you look over the last 2 years, there's no argument to be made. Skubal's one of the 2 best pitchers in baseball, if not the best. He's got 2 Cy Young awards. He can go in there. Tim Lincecum supposedly went into his arbitration hearing with his 2 Cy Young awards and put him on the table and won. And Skubal could try something like that. But I do think if the Tigers have a chance, they're going to have to convince the arbitrators that it's not just about the last 2 years, but it's about Skubal's entire body of work. And that includes, his first year was not good. His first partial year, 2020 was not good. And he scuffled, gave up a ton of home runs the next year. He showed promise, lots of strikeouts. Then he got hurt. In the last 2.5 years, he's been absolutely dominant. But the total track record is not as impressive if you go by that. You can look at it, and I just checked it out. So if you go by wins, he's at 19th over the last 6 years. Win percentage, if you care about that, 14th. Games started is 34th. Innings pitched is 32nd. So the Tigers, I think, can emphasize that stuff. But Boras will just come back with even still like this ERA, all the other stats are top 10. Even in that last 6 year period. And so, it's going to come down to that. And it's ultimately, I think, also going to come down to if they decide that he deserves as much of a raise as they're asking. The Tigers went from 2.5 million, 2.1, something like that last year up to 10 after he won his first Cy Young. And, does he deserve a $9 million raise or a $22 million raise? It's going to be, I don't know. It'll be like I've said a bunch of times, it's going to be fascinating to see how this goes. I can't call it. I guess now I'm leaning towards Skubal, but we'll see.
We know that the market cost of a win is typically around 6 to 9 million per WAR. If you want to look at Fangraphs, Tarik Skubal was worth 26.5 million in 2023, 47.7 million in 2024, and 53.1 million in 2025. That's a lot of wins and that's a lot of money. Tarik Skubal obviously has not made that much, but that is how much he is worth based on his WAR and what we know about the market cost of a win. As for what happens here, I think Tarik Skubal is going to win. And ultimately, it comes down to the midpoint, which is 25.5 million. If he's worth more than that, he gets 32 million. If he's worth less than that, he gets 19 million. So as we discuss this, keep in mind the importance of the 25.5 million midpoint. But to me, Tarik Skubal deserves more than 19 million. I think he's worth more than that. If Tarik Skubal made 19 million, he would end up $750K short of the largest arbitration salary for a pitcher set by David Price with $19.75 million from the Tigers in 2015. So you're telling me that Tarik Skubal in his final year of arbitration in 2026 should make less than David Price in his final year of arbitration in 2015. There's no way that should be allowed to happen. And also the fact that the Tigers offered $19.8 million during the negotiating period before filing at $19 million, to me, that seems disrespectful. Only $50K more for Skubal in 2026 than what David Price made in 2015. You can't make that make sense. So I know the 25.5 million midpoint is the important number here, but I just don't see how Tarik Skubal deserves to make 19 million. And when you consider everything ESPN's Jeff Passan outlined, I think the panel of 3 arbitrators will come to the understanding that Skubal is worthy of setting a precedent. And Skubal is worth more than 25.5 million. And therefore, Skubal will earn $32 million in the 2026 season. That's what I think will happen, but we're going to find out in February what actually happens. I've also seen some people saying the Tigers and Skubal could settle before the arbitration hearing, meaning they'll come to an agreement. Yes, it's possible, but the Tigers, under President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris, are a file and trial team, meaning they won't negotiate on one-year contracts after the hard deadline to exchange salary figures. Now, the Tigers will negotiate multi-year deals, or even one-year deals with an option, which they disguise as multi-year deals. But Tarik Skubal is not going to be negotiating a multi-year deal with the Tigers because he is going to become a free agent after the 2026 season. And even if it is 1 year with an option, it would have to be a player option. There is no way, no matter what the money looks like, that Tarik Skubal will agree to a club option on a 1 year deal as the Tigers and him disguise it as a multi-year deal to come to an agreement before the arbitration hearing. So if it's not a 1 year deal with a player option, then there's no chance the Tigers and Skubal are going to settle before this arbitration hearing. And don't forget, Scott Boras loves to set big records and he loves to set precedents. The only way those things happen is if Skubal wins an arbitration hearing. All right, question 2 of the big 2. What do you think the Tigers will do at third base in the 2026 season? And will they still be searching for stability there going into 2027?
It's going to be our old friend Platoon. I think it's going to be, most likely Matt Bierling against lefties, Colt Keith against most righties. You'll get some Zach McKinstry and some Javi Baez, and maybe some Hayuli, maybe some Trey Cruz, maybe Jace Young comes back, maybe Kevin McGonigal. Maybe they'll put a literal revolving door to play there at some point. Yeah, it's just going to be a whole bunch of bodies. I would be fine if Kevin McGonigal took the job. I think he could do it, but I think you kind of want him to be more of a shortstop, second baseman. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be mostly Colt Keith and Matt Vierling. And I do think it's going to continue to be an issue heading into 2027. I don't think they're going to find a single person who's just going to lock it down, but who knows? Maybe Colt Keith goes out there and has his breakout year and hit 25 home runs and like 280 or whatever. And you go, all right, we have to have his bat in the lineup every day.
This has been so exhausting because the Tigers haven't had an everyday third baseman since Jeimer Candelario in 2022. Yes, that name feels like a blast from the past. It's been 3 years, the entire Scott Harris era, without an everyday third baseman. Here are some numbers for you. In the Scott Harris era, the WRC plus of Tigers third baseman has ranked 28th out of 30 MLB teams in 2023. 21st out of 30 MLB teams in 2024, and 26th of 30 MLB teams in 2025. It was a 74 WRC plus in 2023, an 83 WRC plus in 2024, and a 76 WRC plus in 2025. So the Tigers' third base position has always been among the worst in baseball for offensive performance throughout Scott Harris's tenure as the president of baseball operations, and nothing has been done to fix the problem. In 2023, it was Nick Maton, Zach McKinstry, Matt Vierling, Jonathan Scope, Zach Short, Tyler Nevin. In 2024, it was Gio Urshela, Matt Vierling, Jace Young, Zach McKinstry, Andy Ibanez. In 2025, it was Zach McKinstry, Andy Ibanez, Colt Keith, Javier Baez, Jace Young. Can a full season of Colt Keith fix this trend of poor offensive performance from the Tigers at the third base position? I think without Alex Bregman, Colt Keith projects as the primary third baseman for the Tigers. He also plays second base and first base, but I think the Tigers want to find Colt Keith a spot on the infield and keep him there for most of the season. Yes, he's going to get some reps at second base, but that's Gleyber Torres' position. And yes, he will get some reps at first base, but that's Spencer Torkelson's position. And sure, we're going to see some Colt Keith at the designated hitter, but the Tigers would prefer Kerry Carpenter in that spot more often in an effort to keep him healthy. So if you want Colt Keith's bat in the lineup, he's going to have to play third base in 2026. And if it's Colt Keith, I think it's possible to find some stability. But if the Tigers are going to rely on Zach McKinstry, it's going to be another season of below average performance from the Tigers at the hot corner. But I think Colt Keith is going to get the first opportunity, and I think he's going to get a lot of chances to stick. And I do think he has a chance to become the third baseman of the future, even if you have to deal with below average defense. Do you think Colt Keith can be that guy? Can he make that jump both offensively and defensively, stabilize his spot at third base, and maybe be an option there for years to come? And then when Kevin McGonigal comes up, and again, I don't think Kevin McGonigal is coming until about the third week of August, but regardless of when he arrives, maybe he slots in as the Gleyber Torres replacement at second base, and Colt Keith could be a mainstay at third base. Is that a possibility, or am I asking for too much?
No, I think it's a very real possibility. It was kind of the path we envisioned for Colt Keith when he was coming up through the minors, and until he hurt his shoulder, and that was like, oh, third base is not that realistic anymore. And it was still kind of stunning last year. They're like, yep, he's good at third base now. It was like, well, all right, well, we hadn't heard much about this, but I've always believed in his bat. I think he has purposefully cut down on his swing a lot to make more contact over the last few years. And I think that just with some basic bat speed work in the off season, he could really mix and match the power and the average. He's got some weaknesses, but he's still a really young player. And I think that he's got a chance to break out offensively. I do think he has that upside as a 25 home run guy, and it's just a matter of going out there and do it. The last 2 years he's had terrible Aprils, and he has, it's been up and down otherwise, but we see the glimpses, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, this is the hitter we thought we saw. He had a home run last year on a pitch that was like a foot above the strike zone, and he hit it opposite field. I was like, wow. So there's stuff in there. It's just, sometimes it takes players time. I think a lot of times fans get a little bit anxious or antsy because players haven't figured it all out in their first year and a half or 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But a lot of times guys don't figure it out until they're 27, 28. So I think he's got a chance, but it's going to be a big year for him for sure.
It's easy to forget Colt Keith, only 24 years old, younger than Riley Green. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're joined by one of the best in the business, Evan Drellich, senior writer for The Athletic. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Evan Drellich, senior writer for The Athletic, covering baseball with a focus on labor and business. He has become the go-to voice on everything from the collective bargaining agreement to regional sports networks and we're lucky enough to have him on the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. Evan Drellich, thanks for joining us.
I got to believe I'm the first other Evan you've had on here, right? I mean, that's really the cool thing about this, that two Evans in one room.
Two Evans, one show. Here we go. Let's start with the Tarik Skubal arbitration case with the Tigers. We've talked a lot about it on the show already, but we'll let the expert here explain. The Tigers and Skubal, they couldn't reach an agreement to avoid arbitration by Thursday's deadline, so they had to exchange salary figures in preparation for an arbitration hearing in February. The Tigers filed at $19 million. Skubal filed at $32 million, a gap of $13 million, but more importantly, a midpoint of $25.5 million. Three independent arbitrators. They're going to determine whether Skubal earns $19 million or $32 million, nothing in between. Can you walk us through what this means, what happens next, and who you think will win the case?
So I look at it from this bigger picture labor perspective, because I do spend a lot of time covering CBA, Commissioner's Office, Players Union, and arbitration exists for players. It's the first chance that they can raise their salaries, increase their salaries after they've been making the minimum for usually 3 years. Sometimes it's 2 years, but usually it's 3 years. And for the league, it's by the other side of the coin. It's the way you can kind of keep salaries from growing. So it's a battleground area. Even when it doesn't hit the quote unquote courtroom or the arbitration room where they actually end up having a hearing, everything is a dance around the league trying to keep the salary as low as it can, which you would expect the league to do. Doesn't want to pay more than it has to. And the players trying to increase it. And when you have a gap this large, it becomes inherently a landmark case, right? It has all the makings of kind of a groundbreaking, precedent-setting hearing. And it'll be interesting to see whether indeed there is no settlement. It is certainly possible they could still avoid it. But if they don't, one way or another, somebody's walking away licking their wounds here and somebody's walking away feeling very good about themselves, because it does have a trickle-down waterfall effect over time, because in every subsequent case, and granted, there aren't many pitchers like him, but anytime you have a kind of top-of-the-line pitcher who's in a similar position, they're going to be able to point back to that case. And same thing on the owner's side. You know, if the league wins, the Tigers win, we'll be able to say, well, you know, look at that case. So it's just, arbitration is this fascinating kind of ugly process where the team criticizes the player. Everybody's making their case. It can leave some hurt feelings, but it has this broader impact on salaries in the industry. It's a big deal.
And so one of the things, arbitration is kind of this obscure thing for the average fan. And so what the fans see is the Tigers offered Tarik Skubal $19 million. And they see the free agent pitchers like Alex Cobb signing for $15 million last year. And they think the Tigers are incredibly cheap. So I wonder if you could kind of spell out, and the Skubal's team asked for $32 million, which would be the highest ever. I wonder if you can break down why it's not why the Tigers aren't necessarily being cheap and Skubal isn't being greedy or whatever,
Right. It's all relative. I mean, when I think most people see those numbers involved, it's all funny money, right? Whether it's 2 million or 25, it's all more money than most people listening to the show, I imagine, are making. And if not, great for you. Congratulations. It's more than I'm making. It's all about comps, comparables, comparisons, and precedents. It's all about what year you are in terms of the progression of your career and your position, and looking at historical precedents. And it's not about the reliever they signed last year or any other comparison other than people who are very similar to you as the individual player. And that's purposeful. It creates a system whereby in every, like we were just talking about, in every subsequent case, you can refer back and say, well, this guy got this and this guy got that. And there have been issues over the years. I think they're still ongoing to some degree over, what statistics and what qualities do these arbitrators care about. And so, it's very much a matter of painting a story and presenting a case, and you got to kind of cherry pick the right arguments to make. There was a famous one a few years ago with, well, it wasn't just one. As relievers have gotten used more outside of closing situations, how much do saves matter? And I don't know that. It'll be interesting to see if we ever hear about the arguments, assuming this does go to a hearing, that come out in terms of, are there more modern analytical arguments that are made, or do they try to stick to more classic statistical arguments? Because the deeper you go into the funky wonky stats, the more you might lose an arbitrator. And so it's, you're not presenting to a Fangraphs audience. You're presenting to people who will have an ability to understand this stuff, but they're not hardcore baseball stats geeks typically. That's my understanding anyway.
I don't think we've ever seen an arbitration case like this where a player like Skubal is able to compare himself to all MLB players, not just past arbitration eligible players, because of the two rarely cited provisions in the CBA as a player with special accomplishments and as a player with 5 or more years of service time. So we're going to see Tarik Skubal and his agent, Scott Boras, challenge the arbitration system by doing something that's never really been done before. With that being said, do you think the arbitration system will then change or cease to exist in the next collective bargaining agreement because of the Tarik Skubal arb case?
So the league would love to get rid of it because, again, it is this area where over time players can inch up their salaries. And the league has proposed in the past to eliminate the system, and the union, the players did not like it, and you can understand why. The only way I think it goes away is if there is a much larger change to, say, a salary cap system, which the owners also would love, seem likely to at least propose. How long they stick around on that proposal is really the key question. I'd be pretty surprised if they don't propose a cap or something that looks a lot like it. They've wanted this for decades. The players have fought it for decades. The question is, do they stand there in March of 2027? So the CBA expires December of this year, 2026. March of 27 is when it really gets real and you got to start thinking about missing games because you need a couple weeks for spring training. And so are the owners still come spring of 2027 saying we need a salary cap? If they are, then the arbitration proposal could still exist. And in a world where they win, or, kind of basically bat down the players and get their cap, yeah, you might get rid of arbitration at that point because it matters less in a cap system because what happens in cap systems is you have a revenue split. You decide, let's just make it up. The league is getting 50%. The players are getting 50% in a cap system. And so it's all one big pie. And so the arbitration system matters less. It doesn't matter so much about those individual games because at the end of the day, it's a fixed percentage that's going to the players. It's unlikely that the players will agree to a cap without a major work stoppage that has historically always been the position that is what they are putting out there still today. So my expectation would be no matter what happens here, the arbitration system persists. So long as there isn't a major change in the sport and the cap system, people could be fired. The league and the union can fire these arbitrators. And I think when you have really landmark cases, it is not uncommon for whoever loses to say goodbye to whoever's involved.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into the collective bargaining agreement. Like you mentioned, the CBA expires 11:59 p.m. on December 1st, 2026. Last time the CBA expired, there was a work stoppage. MLB owners enacted a lockout. That was from December 2nd, 2021 until March 10th, 2022. So just more than 3 months. Do you expect there to be another work stoppage this time around? And if so, how long could it last?
Work stoppage is a funny term, and it's technically accurate. I use it plenty. There's some distinction to be drawn between an off-season lockout. Certainly the league wants this distinction drawn, but I think it's a fair point, and a lockout that takes up games, that cancels games. We did have a work stoppage. The winter was shut down in 2021 to 2022. There was no free agency. MLB pulled all these player images off of their website because their argument was they didn't legally have the rights anymore to have these images. But in the end, they found a way to not miss games. They briefly said they were canceling games, the league did, and then they miraculously found a way to schedule the full 162 games. My guess, as of now, is that that's exactly the same thing that's going to happen again. There's so much money at stake, and everybody likes money. It's a little facetious of me, but it's hard to remove that position. The small market owners, the large market owners, the players making the minimum. Everybody wants those paychecks, and every game you miss hurts. Everybody will feel it. And I think on top of that, you have this reality of the entertainment environment today where, you wake up in bed and you can spend 30 minutes on your phone accessing any form of it. You can watch Netflix, whatever. Baseball is not just competing against other sports, it's competing against everything in your pocket, literally. And so for baseball to shut down for any period of time, it's a bad idea. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some owners who really want it, who really want a cap. And it would take a lot, presumably, to get to a cap for the owners. So it's not impossible. The owners say, we think this is rational, even if most people go, that's not rational, and hold down the sport as the players push back on it. And then the question becomes, who blinks first? Do the players cave? Do the owners cave? It just doesn't seem to me the likeliest outcome that we're sitting there in the middle of 27 and they're not playing games in August. There's too much money at stake. Now, there are big things that need to be addressed, and the media rights situation in the sport with local RSN's declining, and there's a lot of that will play into collective bargaining. But yeah, my guess right now is we're going to play a full season, 27. We'll see if the owners take a different tack.
So yeah, we've touched on the arbitration and we brought up salary cap several times here. Do you anticipate those being the two biggest talking points, or what do you think will be the biggest talking points in this negotiation for both sides?
It's always about money at the end of the day. And these things all translate into money. The salary cap ties into this media rights question. So, the large market teams are still doing well with their regional sports networks. Not largest market teams are not. 9 teams with FanDuel Sports Network just cut ties with FanDuel. They're possibly renegotiating returns for 26. But the money that teams got from their local rights, so those, 110 broadcast, 130 broadcasts that end up on the local channel a year, it's not bringing in the money it used to. And so it exacerbates this sense of haves and have-nots in baseball. Is there a way that the league can change its TV rights systems so that basically there's more insulation for those owners who really have bad TV situations locally? It's a very difficult thing to do because the large market teams have the most valuable rights. They're not going to want to just give that away. This is something they own. That why would they share that money? And so, well, why would they share that money? You've got to give them something back, whether that's a cap system, which would benefit large market teams very much, whether that's, okay, now you don't have to share money in other areas. If you're going to share more TV money, you don't have to share as much as you do in other areas, whether that's tickets or whatever. But the interesting thing about any changes that the league and Manfred try to make to revenue sharing, meaning the money shared between owners, is that it's collectively bargained. You have to run that through the players union. So the national TV deals in baseball, meaning the Sunday night deal on now NBC, the game of the week type of stuff, those run through 28. There are going to be new deals for 29. But figuring out what you want to do with those rights, if you're the league, you got to do a lot of that legwork now going into 27, because if you want to change your revenue sharing system, you got to do that in collective bargaining. So underneath the cap stuff is not divorced. It is tied to some degree to what they want to do with media rights. And then let's say the cap stuff goes away. Okay, the players say no to the cap. Well, then what? What are you doing if you're the league, if you're Manfred and the owners, with your media rights, your local media rights specifically, and your revenue sharing with them? And so it's complicated, but the TV stuff is the stuff for people to really pay attention to, I think. And as part of that, it's revenue sharing. What do the league and owners want to do with revenue sharing inside a cap system that they'll probably propose, and eventually on an assumption outside of the cap system once that proposal goes away, assuming it does.
We're going to definitely touch on the TV stuff a little bit more because the Tigers are one of the 9 markets that lost the FanDuel broadcast. But I did want to just throw out a couple of other things we've kind of heard Rob Manfred mention lately, and even before, these other things that might be involved in the CBA negotiation, which could be like international draft. Lately we've heard, in-season tournaments or split seasons, a window to sign players, like a hard window. I don't know if you view any of these as realistic things, or are they just kind of ideas thrown out there that they can then get rid of and say, oh, we made a concession?
So, look, certainly the league could throw things out there and then try. Either side can do this. Say, hey, here's this idea. We know you're not going to like. Okay, we backed off of it, and isn't that nice? And so you should give us something because we backed off of this thing we knew you weren't going to want in the first place. I think both sides are relatively capable of seeing through that. If either side were to try it, the league has always wanted, or at least for a long time, a free agency signing deadline. That is something Rob Manfred still wants, on the belief it would create more excitement in December. If you have this kind of frenzy leading up to it. I don't think that's inherently wrong. I think it's certainly possible there could be more excitement. I think it is also true that the player argument against it, which is that they think it would hurt their salaries, they'd be forced into deals they don't want to take, also has some validity. The proposal that the league has made in the past is it is a multi-year deal signing deadline. So if you're a player who thinks you deserve a multi-year deal, but you don't have one at that deadline, or you don't have one that you like, well, now you can't sign a multi-year deal. And that seems like a difficult position for players to be in. So I don't expect a free agent signing deadline to come out of this. I do think an international draft, which is something the league has also always wanted, is more possible, because the players union last time around, for the first time, actually made proposals to have a draft. They both have some sort of conceptual alignment on, okay, we can have a draft. What they argue about with the international draft is the amount of money that's allotted to that draft. And like I said, it's broken record. It's always about money. Collective bargaining is about money. So I kind of would be surprised if we didn't have an international draft out of this one, just because they were inching closer to each other in a way we hadn't seen last time. That doesn't mean for sure it'll happen, but I do think we could get there. This idea of I think you asked about a split season and the other things Rob Manfred suggested the other day. Manfred did a radio interview on WFAN in New York, and he was asked a bunch of questions, and he acknowledged that he had considered whether to change baseball's format, do a split season, do an in-season tournament like the NBA. He very quickly acknowledged those are unlikely things and difficult to bring to baseball. I think that's the case. It's a big change that with all the other stuff going on, nobody really needs to deal with that right now. They got other stuff they got to take care of. I just don't see that being a big push for the owners, nor am I convinced it would be good for baseball. It could be. You'd have to see more of the details they would want, but I think that's kind of, sure, we've talked about it. He's the commissioner of baseball. You should talk about things, right? I think that's where it stays.
Let's get to something Tigers fans are very passionate about, how they watch baseball games. You referenced this a few minutes ago, but 9 MLB teams carried by FanDuel Sports Network, including the Tigers, canceled their television contracts amid the financial struggles in the regional sports network industry. What does this latest development mean for Tigers fans who simply just want to know where to watch games in the 2026 season?
I don't think there's any fear that the games won't be on, certainly based on everything that's happened in the past few years with this. In MLB, MLB has stepped into broadcast teams, and anybody who isn't with FanDuel, that is certainly the most likely option. It's not, it's possible somebody could go somewhere else, but MLB has basically made itself a production and distribution group where they, arrange for games to be produced, and they work out the deals with the cable and the satellite and the streaming companies to air them. It is not an ideal situation. FanDuel was this company previously called Diamond Sports Group that was in bankruptcy. The Tigers fans might remember that whole process. It's been a long running mess. And frankly, to some degree, the teams are to blame in the sense that they ran back to a company that they knew was on shaky ground. The big difference between being with FanDuel, which used to be Bally when it was under the Diamond Sports Group name, and being with MLB is that MLB doesn't promise a fixed amount of money for the year. So when you're with FanDuel, they're saying we're going to give you whatever. Let's just make up a number. $25 million for your rights for the year. MLB says whatever we're able to sell for you, whatever you bring in streaming subscriptions, that's the money you get. And so, teams have to sit there and kind of make a decision about, all right, well, even with this reduced FanDuel rate, is that better for me to take that fixed amount of money to have that kind of certainty? Or is it better to go with MLB and kind of see where the chips fall? Well, my guess is some teams could end up going back to FanDuel. Some teams will go to MLB. It's possible everybody could go one direction or the other. It just doesn't seem totally likely based on everything that's happened in the past. The 9 MLB teams with FanDuel cut ties with FanDuel, meaning they cut the contract. They said, we're terminating this deal. That doesn't mean it's dead. They can constantly renegotiate these, which is, in a way, it's silly. We saw it in the bankruptcy process where everybody's walking away from each other. All right, then we come back. And then it's just this big dance over and over where Main Street Sports Group can say, which is the parent company of FanDuel now, can say, this isn't working. And then they just get into this dance around a renegotiation. So everything's a negotiation. We'll see. Tigers games will be on the air one way or another. They're not going to make the money they want to from TV, local rights anymore, which ties back to everything else we were talking about earlier, which will be a big fun focus in the CBA.
With the fact that the RS industry has been struggling for so many years, do you see a path towards stability in how fans watch baseball, and what might that future look like? Doesn't MLB just kind of want to take over all the broadcasts just like they did with teams like the Guardians and the Twins in recent years? Is there going to be a one-stop shop for baseball, or is that not how it's going to work?
Rob Manfred has said that he wants to kind of remove the friction for fans to find games. What he has not yet explained, and will need to be, the question I got to kind of newly ask again, is how that reasonably will happen in this environment where baseball wants to do what the NBA did. The NBA a couple of years ago had collected $77 billion worth of deals. And this is over, the lifetime of multiple national contracts with NBC, with Amazon. It's a huge amount of money. But that means to watch those NBA games, you got to have your Prime subscription. You got to have your NBC subscription for Sunday nights. And then you also got to get your local games. Whether baseball can get to some sort of system where truly there's one stop for every game, I don't think so. Because the reason these national deals bring in so much money, and really also local deals, it's exclusivity. It's this idea that you have to tune into our service, and that's why we're paying you all this money, right? People, Peacock wants you to sign up for Peacock. They don't want you to be able to also get the game somewhere else. Why else would they pay all that money? So getting to a world where you have this totally easy access point for baseball. I just don't quite know how that's going to work where they also maximize the money. Maybe they can pull it off. I think it would be great for fans. Fans would absolutely love it. Maybe they do find a way to do that. Beyond that, everybody says cable's dying, which it is, and that streaming's the future, which it probably is. The reality at the moment, and this has been true, is that selling streaming subscriptions, meaning, okay, you could pay $20 to sign up for $20 a month for Tigers games through FanDuel, if they remain there, 2025, whatever the number is. The money teams get from that is not a lot of money. It's the old system is still the thing. The old regional sports network with cable and satellite distribution. That is the thing that brings in the most. It is not individual streaming subscriptions that people could cancel, every month or that only exist for season-long basis. So no, they haven't been able to find a way to replicate the money yet. Where this is all potentially likely going is that these bigger companies that have done the national deals, so like NBC, ESPN, you could think about Amazon in that group, the major streaming companies, Netflix, could end up being the home for local rights as well. The interesting thing here that's already happened is ESPN, MLB's longtime national partner, has the rights to every MLB produced team. So all these teams that have had their regional sports network collapse on them, a lot of them have gone to MLB, like we were just talking about. ESPN now has the rights to carry their games. They're not going to start that until 27, but you're already seeing the big streaming companies that were kind of only in play for the national deals before now wanting local rights. So it could be that you're in Detroit. ESPN says, okay, we are now the local home for the Tigers. So you got to sign up for ESPN's whatever streaming service to be able to get your Tigers games. That is possible. That is not what's happened, but that is possible. And I think that is the vision MLB has for how they could make the most money. Is if you're not only selling Sunday game of the week to NBC, you're selling them X number of local rights.
I wanted to circle back to the potential lockout just a little bit, because the last time we saw a labor stoppage, there seemed to be a bit of like a free agent frenzy. A lot of Tigers fans think that the Tigers were trying to get Carlos Correa, and when it didn't happen, they pivoted and panicked and signed Javier Baez right before the lockout happened. Do you foresee something like that happening with like Tarik Skubal? Do you think it's going to be an issue for him to get the $400 million or $500 million that he's seeking, or for the Dodgers or the Mets, these teams that could pay him with that sort of shortened window? It's going to be somewhere like 3 weeks to a month between the end of the season and when the potential stoppage begins.
It's an interesting decision for anybody next winter. And the league likes it because it shows off, hey, this is how it works with the deadline. You could end up, it's almost personal preference. If you're the player, do you want to get this done beforehand and make sure you kind of have it in place, or do you want to roll the dice coming out of it? I think historically, this is anecdotal. I can't say for sure, but typically right out of the CBA, meaning at the early stages, everybody kind of feels good and there's just more money available. It always has felt to me, and I think to most people, that when you're about to hit the end of a CBA, everybody's a little bit more trepidatious about what they'll spend. So, but it really just comes down to how you want to roll the dice on that question. Are teams going to be more willing to spend going into it or coming out of it? I think most of the time they'd be more willing to spend coming out of it, because frankly, when you're going into a lockout, a work stoppage, everybody's saving money for the potential of the work stoppage, right? Everybody has kind of these everybody, meaning the league and the players union, have reserve funds for a shutdown industry. So yeah, my gut instinct is there's more money after it. That might depend on the individual situation. It might not matter as much for kind of smaller time players, but you're talking about the biggest money. It just feels like it's easier for everybody to, what you're dealing with in terms of the next 5 years of the sport once you have that CBA reach. So yeah, personal preference.
I want to ask you about your book and your career path, and then we'll get you out of here. Your book is Winning Fixes Everything: How Baseball's Brightest Minds Created Sports' Biggest Mess. For those who don't know, Evan Drellich is the reporter who broke the Houston Astros 2017 sign stealing scandal. And then he wrote a book about it. What should Tigers fans know about this book if they haven't read it, especially considering then Astros manager AJ Hinch has been the Tigers manager for the past 5 seasons?
Yeah, it's probably not the worst way to get an understanding of AJ and what preceded the time in Detroit and those kind of formative years. The book I ended up writing, it's really a look at management culture inside the Astros. It's answering this question of how did we get here that you have this massive scandal? Was it an accident, a coincidence that it's in Houston? And I think the book pretty clearly establishes that it isn't a surprise that the way things were run in Houston, going above AJ, there were mistakes AJ Hinch made for sure. and that there were issues that existed above him and his general manager and the team's owner, it became this kind of tinderbox. And so if you're interested in how teams are run and kind of the evolution of really baseball the last 15 years, I'm proud of the book for what it does there. And what was the other part of the question?
I just also like to know about your career path too. I mean, you went from covering teams like the Astros and the Red Sox, and now you're a senior writer at The Athletic, and you have this focus on MLB labor and business issues. Like, did those topics always interest you, or is that something that kind of came up as you were going along throughout your early stages of your career?
When I was young, I had an internship covering the AA Binghamton Mets. And there was this magazine that I wrote a freelance piece for, and it was about the operation of the AA Binghamton Mets front office, which, I don't know that most people are going to sit there and go, you know what, I'm curious about how a minor league front office works. So I think to some degree, I always had interest in it. But the reality is, as an Astros beat writer, particularly, if you weren't paying attention to the collective bargaining agreement as the beat writer for the Houston Astros circa 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, when I was there, you weren't doing your job right. And it turned out that kind of those levers of power and the importance of all these behind the scenes negotiations really drew me in, because it does determine so much of what we see happens on the field. It sets up the arbitration system. And I'm not an arbitration wonk. I'm not somebody who's studying every arbitration case, but I do think baseball is a very random sport. And I grew up loving it. It's so meaningful to me. But in some ways, I can find more truth in the off the field stuff than it's very random what happens in baseball. Inch this way. We all know that. But there's kind of real, I'll say the phrase again, levers of power in what goes on behind the scenes. And I'm just drawn to it. It's baseball politics. It can be very messy. I get yelled at a lot, but it's understanding how things work. That's largely my job. Why is this way is a question I'm answering a lot of the time.
All right, fellow Evan, that is all we have for you. Thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast to discuss everything from Tarik Skubal's arbitration case to the chances of a lockout when the collective bargaining agreement expires. Do you think we can pencil you in for this time next year so we can ask when the lockout is going to end?
You got it. I'll put it on my calendar.
Awesome. Sounds good.
It will not be over at this time next year. I'll go on the record with that. It will still be going. They will just be restarted negotiations, I promise you.
Everyone, that was Evan Drellich, senior writer for The Athletic, a one-of-one reporter when it comes to MLB labor and business. We have more to discuss about the Tigers this week, but first, let's take a break. We're back. The Tigers did not agree to a salary with Tarik Skubal for the 2026 season before Thursday's deadline. We've covered that plenty on this show, but the Tigers did agree on salaries with their other 10 arbitration-eligible players. Here are those 10 players and their salaries. Casey Mize, $6.15 million. Riley Green, $5 million. Zach McKinstry, $4.2 million. Spencer Torkelson, $4.075 million. Will Vest, $3.95 million. Kerry Carpenter, $3.275 million. Matt Vierling, $3.255 million. Jake Rogers, $3.05 million. Tyler Holton, $1.575 million. And Bo Brisky, $1.1575 million. That is a total of just north of $35 million. As for Tarik Skubal, we're going to wait and see for the arbitration hearing, whether it's $19 million or $32 million. But of those 10 players that the Tigers agreed to salaries with, who are you most interested in going into the 2026 season?
It's got to be, for me, it's got to be the big two bats. And I should just say big two, but the two I'm talking about are Green and Torkelson. Like Carpenter, I just feel like Carpenter kind of is what he is, and it's what he is very good. But I do feel like I'm just curious to know if we've seen the best that we can out of Torkelson and Green, or if there's another level both of them can go. Green has been between like 20% and 35% above average as a hitter over the last 3 years. Torkelson got up to, I think, a 118 WRC plus last year. Got his walk rate up to 11%, 31 homers. I just wonder if you can get one of those years where, Torkelson hits 250 with 35, 40 bombs, or Green puts it all together and, the strikeouts are still going to be high, but he hits 35, 40 bombs and has an average higher than 260. I feel like it's in there, and they're the guys that need to lead this team. They're the two big boppers in the middle of the lineup, and it's got to be them, I think.
For me, it's going to be Casey Mize, not so much because I'm curious about his future with the Tigers, because he becomes a free agent after the 2026 season. I'm more curious about what the Tigers could be losing here. Like if Casey Mize really is able to take another step forward, and we saw an improvement, especially in the first half of 2025, if he can find that balance between the first half of 2025 and the second half of 2025, I don't think he's going to have a sub-3 ERA, but I think he could hover in that 3.3 to 3.5 ERA range. I think that's probably the best that he's going to provide. And if he's able to stretch that out over a full season, that is a true number 2 starter, which the Tigers really need. The Tigers need somebody to pitch behind Tarik Skubal. And then beyond that, like, what does that mean for Casey Mize when it comes to his free agency? Like, this is a platform year for Casey Mize and for Tarik Skubal and for Jack Flaherty, all 3 Tigers pitchers who are set to become free agents next offseason. So I'm curious to see, can Casey Mize build on some of the improvements that he made? I mean, he did improve the swing and miss rate. He did improve the strikeout rate. Is there room for further improvement? No doubt about it. But the fact is, he did take a step forward from 2024 to 2025. And I'm curious if he can do the same from 2025 to 2026. And if he's able to do so, you feel pretty good about rolling the dice and finding a number 2 starter when it comes to Casey Mize, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson. Who's it going to be? I think if Casey Mize can take that next step, he has a chance to be right there in play as a potential number 2 starter. And then maybe he goes out and gets paid. I mean, this is a former number 1 overall pick, highly valued across the league just based on the fact that he was a former 1-1. So I think that could bode well for him in free agency, especially if he performs well. So that's the guy that I'm most curious in, and we'll see what ends up happening. Whether it's Casey Mize, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson, someone's going to have to emerge as a number 2 starter. And if Tarik Skubal is going to be making $32 million, the Tigers probably don't have the payroll space to go out and get anybody else to join that mix. So I think Casey Mize could be really important to the Tigers for 2026, but not for beyond that. All right, Justin Henry Malloy, he had been traded to the Tampa Bay Rays for cash considerations. That happened January 6th. He was designated for assignment. Then the Tigers traded him to the Rays for cash before the waiver process. Essentially, it just allowed the Rays to jump ahead the line in the waiver priority to get Justin Henry Malloy. The Tigers already cut him. This wasn't a surprise. This was expected. But with JN going to the Rays, are the Tigers going to regret moving on from him? Because we know the Rays, they do a really good job of finding ways to win in the margins. Like, they preach exactly what Scott Harris preaches, but their track record of getting the job done and finding success in those margins, it's pretty significant. They're really, really good at it. Probably the best team in baseball at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to regret it a ton unless the Rays can both get Malloy to make more contact in the zone and get him to play a defensive position. Like, I think the Tigers are at the point now where they are having to part with quality players who have interesting upside, but they don't really have the time to like cram them into the lineup. Ideally, Malloy would be that kind of right-handed lefty masher, but Jahmai Jones took that job last year, and without a real defensive position, it's just tough. Now, I could absolutely see him with steady playing time, putting up pretty nice numbers with the Rays, but it's not something that I think the Tigers, I don't picture him going off and becoming like an all-star or an MVP. Never say never, but I think most likely you're going to get a solid role player at best. So I don't think it's a huge loss. Same with like Andy Ibanez signing with the Dodgers, right? Like, it's, you part ways and you thank them for their help the last few years and then move on.
Yeah, Justin Henry Malloy would have been great for the 2019, 2020, 2021 Tigers. I mean, even looking at the 2021 roster, like, he could have been what Nomar Mazara was. Like, go play right field, get a bunch of at-bats, and like just see what happens. And maybe the Tigers fall into something. He wasn't able to get that opportunity with these versions of the Tigers, the 2024, 2025 Tigers, because, well, these teams are just that much better than the 2019, 2020, and 2021, and even 2022 and 2023 Tigers. So I don't think the Tigers are going to regret this, but you mentioned never say never, but I will say never. I don't think Justin Henry Malloy ever becomes a reliable defender anywhere on the diamond, whether it's third base, first base, the corner outfield spots. I think he has a chance to become a masher in the DH spot if he can cut down on the in zone swing and miss, but I don't ever see him being like an everyday outfielder just because of the fact that the defense is just so poor that I don't see it actually ever playing out there in the corner spots. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. And thanks to everyone for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Most importantly, give us a rating and comment what you think about the show. You can say all kinds of nice things about Chris, and you can say whatever you want about me. Stick with free.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.